Amira woke up with a sense of emptiness. Her eyes, heavy as lead, took some time to adjust to the dim light around her. The low ceiling seemed closer than it should, and the only source of light was a small bulb swinging from the ceiling, casting restless shadows on the concrete walls. The air was thick, carrying the scent of aged wood and accumulated dust. Amira slowly pushed herself upright, feeling the discomfort of the hard mattress beneath her. Looking around, she realized she was in a basement, a place that should never be her home. "Where am I?" she whispered to herself, but her voice echoed in the empty room as if no other soul was nearby to hear it. She tried to remember how she had ended up there, but her memory was foggy. Disconnected fragments floated in her mind. Khaled, her husband, the mansion, a dinner that had abruptly ended. Then, nothing. She pressed her fingers to her temples, trying to piece it together, but her mind remained clouded. A faint creak interrupted her thoughts. The heavy wooden door opened and Khaled stepped in. Impeccable as always, he wore a tailored gray suit that contrasted with the rustic basement surroundings. His gaze was fixed on her, laden with something she couldn't decipher: guilt, protection, or perhaps fear. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. Amira struggled to stand, her body feeling more fragile than she had expected. "Khaled, what is this? Why am I here?" Her voice was firm, but her expression betrayed the confusion and panic she felt. He approached her with measured steps. "Amira, please, listen to me. This is for your own safety. Things are complicated out there." "Complicated how?" she countered, crossing her arms. "I'm not a prisoner, Khaled. I want to leave now." He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly combed black hair. "You need to trust me. There are people who want to harm you, harm both of us." Amira took a step back, assessing the situation. His tone and words didn't match what she knew about Khaled. He had always been a man of action, never of subterfuge. The idea that he would hide her in a basement as a form of protection seemed absurd. "This is ridiculous, Khaled," she shot back, gesturing at the surroundings. "You call this protection? A subterranean chamber?" He looked at her for a moment, as if struggling to find the right words. But instead of responding, he turned and walked to the door. Before leaving, he said, "I'll bring food. Please, don't try anything reckless." As the door closed and the lock clicked into place, Amira felt the tension in her body mount. She couldn't believe what was happening. Khaled's words sounded more like a warning than an explanation. She paced the room, examining every corner. There was little furniture, a simple bed, a small table with one chair, and an empty cabinet. In the corner, an improvised bathroom. Above the table, a single small window allowed a beam of sunlight to stream in, illuminating the dust particles in the air. Amira climbed onto the chair to try to see outside. All she could glimpse were endless sand dunes. It was the desert. The realization sent a chill down her spine. Even if she managed to escape the basement, where would she go? She was in the middle of nowhere, with no phone, no money, and no idea of what was really happening. After some time, she returned to the bed and sat down, her arms wrapped around her body. The feeling of abandonment was overwhelming. Amira's mind kept racing, trying to make sense of Khaled's words. He seemed sincere, but something didn't add up. He was afraid, that much was clear, but of what? A distant creak broke her train of thought. This time it wasn't the door, but something above the small window. Perhaps it was just the wind blowing sand against the structure. She shook her head, trying to dispel the growing panic. Hours passed. The door opened again, and Khaled entered with a tray. There was a simple plate of food and a bottle of water. He placed the tray on the table without saying a word. Amira rose from the bed and walked over to him, her gaze intense. "If you want to protect me, Khaled, you're going to have to trust me," she said, keeping her tone firm. "Tell me what's going on." He hesitated, his eyes shifting briefly before meeting hers. "Not now, Amira. When it's safe, I promise you'll know everything." She reached out to touch him, but he stepped back slightly, as if the mere proximity was dangerous. Without another word, he left, closing the door once more. Amira sat at the table, staring at the food. Her hunger was overshadowed by the growing sense of isolation. Something was terribly wrong, and she knew she needed to figure out what it was. Standing up, she resumed exploring the basement. Behind a small pile of boxes in the corner, something caught her attention. A hole in the wall, discreet but clearly deliberate. Inside, her fingers found something cold and rectangular, a cell phone. Amira pulled the device out and stared at it as if it were the key to her freedom. The screen lit up, revealing a saved number. Her breathing quickened as she pressed the call button. A male voice answered almost immediately. "Who is this?" The voice asked, tense. Amira hesitated for a moment before responding. "My name is Amira. Who are you?" On the other end of the line, the man seemed to take a deep breath before saying, "You need to get out of there. He's not who you think he is." The phone slipped slightly in her hand as the words sank in. Amira felt the foundation of her convictions crumble like a house of cards. What was Khaled hiding? And why did that voice seem to know more about her situation than she did? Amira stared at the phone in her trembling hand, its dark screen illuminated only by the dim light from the swinging bulb overhead. Her thoughts raced. Who was the man on the other end of the line? How did he know about her situation? And more importantly, why was he urging her to leave? She gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles turning white. She had so many questions, but dialing the number again felt like stepping into the unknown, and she wasn't ready. Instead, she placed the phone carefully back into its hiding spot and slid the pile of boxes back into place. For now, she needed to assess her options. The basement felt colder as the day dragged on, despite the desert heat that must have been blazing outside. Amira paced, her mind torn between trusting Khaled and believing the stranger's cryptic warning. The minutes stretched into hours, and when the door creaked open again, Khaled stepped in with another tray of food. This time, he lingered. His sharp features softened as he studied her, but Amira wasn't sure if it was concern or guilt she saw in his eyes. She decided to test the waters. "Khaled," she began, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Why are you so afraid? You're not telling me everything." He placed the tray on the table but didn't meet her gaze. "I've told you enough. You're safe here. That's what matters." "Safe?" she repeated, a hint of sarcasm creeping into her tone. "I'm locked in a basement with no idea what's going on outside. That doesn't feel like safety to me." Khaled's jaw tightened. He walked to the window, his back to her, and stared at the sliver of sunlight that cut through the sand. "There are things you don't understand, Amira. Things that are bigger than us." "Then help me understand," she urged, stepping closer to him. "Tell me the truth, Khaled. I deserve that much." He turned to face her, his expression conflicted. "You deserve so much more than this," he said softly, almost as if speaking to himself. "But not yet. It's not the right time." Amira clenched her fists in frustration as he walked toward the door. "You can't keep me here forever," she called after him. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. "I'm doing this for you," he said, almost inaudibly, before closing the door behind him. As soon as the lock clicked, Amira let out a frustrated sigh. Whatever Khaled's reasons, she couldn't afford to wait for him to decide when it was right to tell her the truth. She retrieved the phone from its hiding spot and stared at it again. The number was still saved, glowing faintly on the screen. Taking a deep breath, she dialed it. "Hello?" The same voice answered, cautious and firm. "It's me," she said, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Amira." The man on the other end hesitated. "You shouldn't have called again. It's dangerous." "Dangerous?" she snapped. "I'm already locked in a basement. Tell me what's going on." The man sighed. "Listen carefully. Khaled isn't who you think he is. He's involved with people. Powerful people who would do anything to protect their secrets. You're caught in the middle of something bigger than you realize." Amira's stomach churned. "Who are you?" she demanded. "And how do you know all this?" "I can't tell you that," the man said firmly. "But you need to find a way out. You're not safe there. You keep saying I'm not safe, but you're not giving me any real answers." She shot back. What do these people want from me? There was a long pause on the other end. When the man finally spoke, his voice was grim. You saw something, didn't you? Something you shouldn't have. That's why he's keeping you there. To protect you, or to keep you quiet. Amira's mind raced back to the fragments of memory she had tried to piece together earlier. The dinner, the abrupt end, Khalid's tense demeanor. What had she seen? She couldn't remember. I don't know what you're talking about, she said finally. You will, the man replied. But for now, you need to get out of there. The longer you stay, the more danger you're in. The call ended abruptly, leaving Amira staring at the phone in stunned silence. She wanted to believe Khalid was protecting her, but doubt gnawed at her. Who was this stranger? And why did his words feel like a warning she couldn't ignore? As she returned the phone to its hiding place, her resolve hardened. She couldn't sit idly by and wait for answers. If Khalid wouldn't tell her the truth, she would find it herself, no matter the cost. The hours stretched endlessly as Amira sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing with possibilities. The phone call had stirred something deep within her, a nagging sense of urgency and a thirst for answers. Who was the stranger on the line? And why did his warning resonate so strongly? What was Khalid hiding? Her gaze drifted to the tiny window above the table, the only connection to the outside world. Through the narrow slit, she could see the sand dunes glistening under the fading sunlight. The desert felt as much of a prison as the basement itself, isolating her from any hope of escape. But she knew one thing: waiting passively wasn't an option. When the door creaked open again, Amira was ready. Khalid entered with his usual calm demeanor, carrying a tray of food and a small bottle of water. He placed them on the table without a word, his movements careful and deliberate. This time, however, she wasn't going to let him leave without confronting him. Khalid, she said, standing up and meeting his gaze. I need to know what's going on. You owe me the truth. He paused, his hand lingering on the edge of the table. Amira, I've already told you everything you need to know. You're safe here. That's what matters. Safe? She repeated, her voice rising slightly. You've locked me in a basement and refused to tell me why. That doesn't feel like safety to me. Khalid's expression darkened. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she recognized as his way of stalling for time. It's complicated, he said finally. There are people who would do anything to hurt us. I'm keeping you here to protect you. Protect me from what? She demanded. From who? His silence spoke volumes. Frustration boiled within her as she took a step closer, her eyes narrowing. I deserve to know the truth, Khalid. If you really care about me, you'll tell me what's happening. For a moment, it seemed like he might crack. His shoulders tensed and his jaw clenched as if he were wrestling with himself. But then he turned away, heading for the door. Not yet, he murmured. It's not the right time. Before she could protest, he was gone, the door locking behind him. Amira let out an exasperated sigh and sat down heavily on the chair. The food on the tray remained untouched as her appetite was swallowed by the gnawing frustration of being kept in the dark. Her mind drifted back to the phone call. The stranger's words had been cryptic but clear. Khalid wasn't who she thought he was. Could she trust the man she had married, the man who claimed to be protecting her? Or was he keeping her here to cover up his own secrets? The more she thought about it, the more determined she became. She couldn't rely on Khalid to give her answers. If she wanted the truth, she'd have to find it herself. Amira returned to the phone hidden in the wall. She turned it over in her hands, examining it more closely. It was an older model, slightly scratched but functional. The screen displayed the same number she had dialed earlier. This time, however, she scrolled through the call log, hoping to find some clue about the stranger's identity. The log revealed only one name, unknown. There were several outgoing calls to the number, but no messages or contacts that might offer additional information. Frustrated, Amira put the phone down and leaned back against the wall, her thoughts swirling. Something wasn't adding up. Khalid's evasiveness, the stranger's warnings, and her own fragmented memories all pointed to a larger puzzle she couldn't yet see. She closed her eyes, trying to piece together what little she could remember. The dinner, the soft hum of conversation, Khaled's tense smile as he exchanged words with a man she didn't recognize. Then, a sudden shift in the atmosphere, a sharp word, a broken glass. She remembered Khaled grabbing her arm, his grip firm but not painful, and leading her away from the table. After that, everything was a blur. What had happened at that dinner? And why couldn't she remember? The sound of footsteps above her pulled her back to the present. They were slow and deliberate, moving across the floor above the basement. Her pulse quickened. She wasn't sure if it was Khaled or someone else, but the thought of being discovered with the phone made her heart race. She quickly slid the phone back into its hiding spot and covered it with the boxes. Then she returned to the bed, trying to appear as though she had been sitting idly the entire time. The footsteps grew louder, then paused near the door. Amira held her breath, her body tense. The door didn't open. Instead, the footsteps retreated, growing fainter until they disappeared entirely. Amira exhaled slowly, her hands trembling slightly. Whoever it was, they hadn't come for her, not yet, at least. As the evening wore on, Amira's resolve hardened. She couldn't wait for Khaled to decide when she was ready to know the truth. The stranger's warning echoed in her mind. You're caught in the middle of something bigger than you realize. If she wanted answers, she would have to dig deeper. And she knew exactly where to start. The man she had married, the man who claimed to be protecting her, but who might be hiding the most dangerous secrets of all. The dim light of dawn filtered through the tiny window as Amira paced the small confines of the basement. Her thoughts swirled in a storm of uncertainty, frustration, and determination. The phone call, Khaled's cryptic warnings, and the stranger's insistence that she wasn't safe all painted a fragmented picture of a deeper mystery, one she was desperate to solve. She couldn't sit idle any longer. She needed to act. Amira began by studying her surroundings with fresh eyes. Every corner of the basement, every piece of furniture, every crevice in the walls became a potential ally in her bid for freedom. Her attention fixated on the small window above the table. It wasn't large, but it might be just big enough for her to squeeze through if she could figure out how to reach it. Standing on the table, she peered through the glass, her heart sinking at the sight of endless sand dunes. The desert stretched as far as her eyes could see, golden waves shimmering under the first rays of sunlight. Even if she managed to escape, where would she go? The realization was disheartening, but she pushed it aside. Freedom came first. Everything else could be figured out later. She tested the window's edges, her fingers probing for weaknesses. The frame was old but sturdy, and the glass didn't budge when she pushed against it. Determined, Amira grabbed the chair and used its leg to tap against the pane, careful not to make too much noise. A small crack appeared, encouraging her to strike harder. Each tap sent her pulse racing, the fear of being discovered adding urgency to her efforts. A faint noise made her freeze. She turned her head toward the door, her breath caught in her throat. The house above was silent, save for the occasional creak of wood settling. She waited a few tense moments before resuming her task, her movements more cautious this time. With one final strike, the glass shattered, the sound louder than she had anticipated. Her heart pounded as she scrambled to clear away the shards, her hands trembling. The fresh air that drifted in was a small victory, invigorating her resolve. But before she could pull herself up to the window, the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps echoed above her. Someone was coming. Amira's mind raced as she surveyed the mess. She quickly grabbed the chair and table, repositioning them as quietly as possible to hide her makeshift escape attempt. The broken glass she swept into a corner, covering it with a cloth from the bed. She barely had time to sit on the mattress and feign innocence before the door creaked open. Khaled stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. His sharp eyes scanned the room, lingering a moment too long on the table beneath the window. "Did you sleep?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with suspicion. "Not much," Amira replied, keeping her tone steady. She avoided his gaze, focusing instead on her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Khaled stepped further into the room, his presence commanding as always. He set a tray on the table, the clatter of dishes breaking the tension in the air. "You look tired," he remarked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Hard to sleep when I'm locked in a basement with no explanation." She shot back, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. Khaled's jaw tightened. He took a step closer, towering over her. "I told you, Amira. It's for your safety." "Safety from what?" She countered, meeting his gaze now, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "I don't even know what I'm supposed to be afraid of," he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "You wouldn't understand." "Then make me understand," she demanded. "Or is it easier for you to just keep me in the dark?" For a moment, Khaled seemed torn. His lips parted as if he were about to say something, but he stopped himself, shaking his head instead. "Eat," he said finally, his voice low. "You need your strength." Amira glared at him as he turned and left, the door locking once more behind him. She waited until his footsteps receded before springing into action. The table and chair were repositioned under the window, and she climbed up, bracing herself against a frame. The desert stretched before her, vast and unwelcoming, but it was still freedom. She hoisted herself up, her body straining against the small opening. The jagged edges of the broken glass scraped against her arms, drawing thin lines of blood, but she didn't stop. With one final push, she managed to slip through, landing unceremoniously in the sand outside. The morning air was cooler than she expected, the chill biting against her skin. She scanned her surroundings, her heart pounding. No one appeared to have noticed her escape yet, but she knew it was only a matter of time. Gathering her courage, she turned away from the house and began running toward the horizon, her footsteps kicking up sand behind her. The desert was unforgiving, each step more exhausting than the last. The sun climbed higher, its heat intensifying with every passing moment. Amira's throat burned with thirst, and her legs ached, but she pushed forward, the thought of being recaptured fueling her determination. A distant sound made her stop abruptly. She turned, her chest heaving as she scanned the horizon. In the distance, a cloud of dust was rising, accompanied by the faint roar of an engine. Panic surged through her. Someone was coming after her. With no cover in sight, Amira had no choice but to keep running. She veered toward a small cluster of rocks in the distance, hoping they would provide some semblance of shelter. The sound of the engine grew louder, the vehicle closing in on her rapidly. Reaching the rocks, she ducked behind them, pressing herself against the cool surface. Her breathing was shallow as she listened, the sound of the vehicle now dangerously close. She dared to peek around the edge, her heart sinking as she recognized Khaled's Jeep. He was alone, his expression grim as he scanned the landscape. Amira's mind raced. She couldn't outrun him, not in the open desert. Her only option was to wait and hope he didn't find her. She held her breath as the Jeep slowed, Khaled's gaze sweeping over the rocks. He stopped the vehicle and stepped out, his boots crunching against the sand. "Amira," he called, his voice echoing across the barren landscape. "Come out. It's not safe out here." She pressed herself tighter against the rock, her heart pounding in her ears. Khaled's footsteps drew closer, each one sending a jolt of fear through her. As he rounded the edge of the rocks, their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "I told you," Khaled said softly, his voice filled with a mix of frustration and something else concern. "You're not safe out here." Amira's jaw tightened as she straightened, refusing to cower. "And I'm not safe with you either, am I?" Khaled sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Let's go back," he said, his tone weary. "Please." Reluctantly, Amira followed him to the Jeep, her mind churning with questions. She might not have escaped this time, but she was more determined than ever to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. The Jeep rumbled back toward the house, the silence between Amira and Khaled thick and oppressive. She kept her gaze fixed on the horizon, refusing to meet his eyes. Her escape attempt had failed, but the questions burning in her mind remained stronger than ever. Khaled, for his part, seemed lost in thought, his grip on the steering wheel tightening with each bump in the sand. When they reached the mansion, Khalid opened her door but didn't say a word. She climbed out reluctantly, her legs aching from her desperate sprint through the desert. He escorted her back to the basement, his presence looming like a shadow. As the door closed behind her with a familiar click of the lock, Amira collapsed onto the bed, her body and mind drained. But defeat wasn't an option. Khalid's reaction during her escape had only deepened her suspicions. He wasn't just protecting her from vague external threats. He was hiding something, and she was determined to find out what. Hours passed as Amira reviewed everything she had seen and heard since her captivity began. The phone, the cryptic warning from the stranger, Khalid's evasive answers. Pieces of the puzzle were scattered before her, but the picture remained incomplete. Then her eyes wandered to a spot she hadn't noticed before, a seam in the wall behind the stack of boxes she had moved earlier. Curious, Amira approached the wall and ran her fingers along the seam. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but as she pressed against it, the faint outline of a door became visible. Her pulse quickened. Could this be it? Could this lead to the answers she so desperately sought? With a grunt of effort, she pushed against the hidden door. It groaned in protest before finally giving way, revealing a narrow passageway that led to another small room. The air was cooler here, and a faint metallic scent lingered. In the center of the room stood a large steel vault, its surface gleaming in the dim light. Amira approached the vault cautiously, her heart pounding. Why would Khalid keep a vault hidden in the basement? What could be so important that it needed to be locked away? She examined the keypad on the front, its sleek design contrasting with the rough walls around it. It required a code, and she had no idea what it could be. She sat back on her heels, her mind racing. If Khalid had gone to such lengths to hide this, then whatever was inside must be crucial. But how could she gain access? Her fingers hovered over the keypad, unsure of where to begin. The sound of the basement door opening startled her. She scrambled back to the main room, closing the hidden door behind her just as Khalid descended the stairs. His expression was unreadable, but there was a tension in his posture that hadn't been there before. "What were you doing?" he asked, his tone low and controlled. Amira met his gaze, her expression defiant, thinking, trying to make sense of all this. Khalid studied her for a moment, then placed a fresh tray of food on the table. "You should rest," he said, his voice softer now. "You've been through a lot. Why don't you tell me what's really going on?" She countered, crossing her arms. "I deserve the truth, Khalid. You can't keep me locked away and expect me to trust you." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "You wouldn't understand. Try me," she pressed, stepping closer to him. "Whatever it is you're hiding, it can't be worse than what I'm imagining." For a moment, Khalid seemed to falter. His shoulders sagged, and his gaze dropped to the floor. "Amira, there are things that I can't explain right now. But you have to believe me when I say I'm doing this for you, for us. How can I believe you when you keep shutting me out?" she asked, her voice breaking. "You're hiding something, Khalid. I know you are." He looked at her then, his expression a mixture of guilt and determination. "You're right. I am hiding something, but it's not what you think." Before she could press him further, Khalid turned and left, the door locking behind him once more. Amira sank onto the bed, frustration and exhaustion washing over her. His words had only deepened the mystery, leaving her with more questions than answers. But now she had a lead. The hidden vault in the secret room was a key piece of the puzzle, and she was determined to find a way to open it. Whatever Khalid was hiding, it was locked inside that steel fortress, and she wouldn't rest until she uncovered the truth. The next few days passed in an agonizing blur. Amira's thoughts were consumed by the hidden vault and its secrets. She replayed Khalid's words over and over, searching for hidden meanings, clues that might lead her closer to the truth. The passage of time in the basement was measured only by the faint light filtering through the tiny window. But Amira's resolve grew stronger with each moment. She needed that code. Her opportunity came late one evening when Khalid entered with his usual tray of food. This time, however, Amira noticed a slight change in his demeanor. He looked more worn, his movements slower, as if the weight of his secrets was finally taking its toll. "You look tired," she said, her tone neutral but probing. He glanced at her, his expression guarded. "It's been a long day. Maybe it would be easier if you stopped keeping everything bottled up," she suggested. "I'm here, Khalid. Whatever you're dealing with, we can handle it together." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he set the tray down and leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. "You're persistent, I'll give you that," he said, a faint smile ghosting across his lips. "But there are things you're better off not knowing." Amira stepped closer, her gaze steady. "And there are things I already know you're hiding. There's a vault down here, Khalid. What's inside?" His head snapped toward her, his eyes narrowing. "How do you—" He cut himself off, exhaling sharply. "You've been exploring." "You didn't leave me much choice," she replied. "You've locked me away with no explanation. Do you really expect me to sit here and wait for answers to fall into my lap?" Khalid's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might lash out. Instead, he pushed away from the wall and began pacing, his steps measured and deliberate. "The vault isn't what you think," he said finally. "It's complicated." "Then uncomplicated for me," Amira pressed. "What are you hiding, Khalid? What could possibly be so important that you need to keep it locked away?" He stopped pacing and turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "It's not about what's in the vault. It's about who might come looking for it." Amira's stomach churned. "Who?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Khalid hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he said, "Powerful people, dangerous people. If they find out you've seen it—" He trailed off, his gaze dropping to the floor. "If they find out I've seen what?" Amira demanded, taking another step toward him. "Khalid, you're not making any sense." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not just a vault. It's evidence documents, recordings, things that could ruin lives. Things I never wanted you involved in." Amira's mind raced. "You're keeping evidence? Against who?" Khalid didn't answer. Instead, he turned away and ran a hand over his face. "This was never supposed to happen. You were never supposed to know. But I do know," she said firmly. "And now you have to tell me everything. What are you involved in, Khalid? What have you dragged me into?" He spun around, his eyes blazing. "I'm trying to protect you," he snapped. "Do you think I want this? Do you think I want to keep you locked away? Everything I've done has been to keep you safe." "Safe from what?" she countered. "From who?" For a long moment, the only sound in the room was their heavy breathing. Then Khalid's shoulders slumped, and the fight seemed to drain out of him. "There are people who would kill to get their hands on what's in that vault," he said quietly. "People who wouldn't hesitate to hurt you to get to me." Amira's throat tightened. "Then why keep it? Why not destroy it?" Khalid shook his head. "It's not that simple. What's in there? It's leverage. It's the only thing keeping them from coming after us outright." "And you think they won't find out about it? About me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "That's why I've kept you hidden," he said, his tone pleading. "As long as they don't know you're involved, you're safe." Amira took a step back, her mind reeling. She had come into this marriage believing she knew Khalid, trusting him implicitly. But now, she wasn't sure who he was anymore. Was he a protector or a manipulator? A savior or a man who had dragged her into something far beyond her understanding? "I need time to think," she said finally, her voice shaking. Khalid nodded, his expression heavy with regret. "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "But please, Amira, trust me. Everything I've done for you." He left the room without another word, the door clicking shut behind him. Amira sat down heavily on the bed, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear, anger, and confusion. The truth Khalid had revealed only raised more questions, and the danger he had hinted at felt closer than ever. She glanced toward the hidden door to the vault. Whatever secrets Khalid was keeping, they were in there. And if she wanted the full truth, she would have to find a way to open it, no matter the risk. The tension in the mansion was palpable. Days passed with little interaction between Amira and Khalid, and each moment alone only heightened her determination to uncover the truth. The vault was a riddle she couldn't yet solve, but its existence had become an obsession. It was the key to everything, and she was certain of it. Her chance came unexpectedly. Late one afternoon, Amira heard voices echoing faintly from above. She pressed her ear against the basement door, straining to catch fragments of the conversation. Khalid was speaking to someone, a woman's voice, sharp and assertive, cutting through his measured tone. It wasn't until the name Yara was mentioned that Amira's pulse quickened. Yara, Khalad's sister. She had met her only briefly before their wedding, and even then, something about her had felt off. Too polished, too calculating, like she was always 3 steps ahead in a game only she understood. Amira heard the door to the basement unlock, and she scrambled back to her bed, feigning nonchalance. When Yara appeared in the doorway, her presence was as commanding as Amira remembered. Dressed in a tailored suit and wearing an air of authority, she stepped inside, her sharp eyes scanning the room with an almost predatory gaze. "So," Yara began, her voice cool and laced with disdain. "This is where my brother's been hiding you." Amira straightened, meeting Yara's gaze with defiance. "And you are?" she asked, though she already knew. Yara smirked. "I'm the one trying to clean up his messes," she replied, crossing her arms. "You must have realized by now that Khalid isn't exactly forthcoming with the truth." Amira's jaw tightened. "If you have something to say, just say it." Yara's smirk widened. "Direct. I like that. Fine. Then, Khalid's little vault of secrets? It's a liability. He's playing a dangerous game, and you're caught in the middle of it. What do you know about the vault?" Amira asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. "More than you do," Yara replied smoothly. "And let me give you some advice. The best thing you can do is stay out of it. Khalid thinks he's protecting you, but the truth is, he's put a target on your back. If those files fall into the wrong hands, well, let's just say no one walks away unscathed." Amira frowned. "Why are you telling me this? If you're so concerned, why not convince him to destroy the files?" Yara's expression darkened. "Because Khalid won't listen. He thinks he's doing the right thing, but he doesn't see the bigger picture. That's always been his problem. He's too idealistic." Amira hesitated, searching Yara's face for any hint of sincerity. "And what's your plan then?" she asked. "To steal the files yourself?" Yara's eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "If it comes to that, yes. But don't mistake my actions for selflessness. I'm not here to save you, Amira. I'm here to protect what's left of this family. And if that means cutting Khalid loose, so be it." The words hung heavy in the air. Amira's chest tightened as the implications sank in. Yara wasn't just a concerned sister. She was a threat, someone willing to do whatever it took to achieve her goals. "Stay out of my way," Yara said, her tone sharp. "If you know what's good for you." With that, she turned on her heel and strode out of the basement, the door locking behind her. Amira sat frozen for a moment, her mind racing. Yara's visit had confirmed what she already suspected. The vault wasn't just a repository for Khalid's secrets. It was a powder keg, and everyone around it was playing with fire. But Yara's warning only strengthened Amira's resolve. She couldn't trust Khalid. She couldn't trust Yara. The only person she could rely on was herself. And if she wanted to survive this, she needed to find out exactly what was inside that vault. As night fell, Amira waited until the house above fell silent. Then, with the stealth born of desperation, she approached the hidden door once more. This time, she was determined to find a way in. Yara's betrayal had lit a fire within her, and there was no turning back. The air in the mansion was thick with tension. Amira's mind buzzed with fragments of her recent encounter with Yara. Khalid's sister wasn't just a manipulator. She was a player in a dangerous game Amira barely understood. But the more Yara warned her to stay out of the vault, the more determined she became to uncover its secrets. Late that night, a sound jolted Amira awake. It was faint at first, a distant rumble that seemed to shake the walls of the basement. She sat up, her heart racing, straining to make sense of the noise. Then it grew louder, shouting, heavy footsteps, and the unmistakable crack of something breaking upstairs. Someone was attacking the mansion. Amira's pulse quickened as adrenaline surged through her veins. She darted toward the basement door, pressing her ear against it. The voices were muffled, but she could make out fragments of a heated argument. Khalid's voice rang out, sharp and commanding, followed by another voice, deep and threatening. The sound of gunfire ripped through the air, sending Amira stumbling back from the door. Panic clawed at her chest. Whoever these intruders were, they weren't here for idle threats. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was this about the vault? Had Yara betrayed Khalid and revealed its location? She couldn't stay in the basement. The door was locked, but Amira's eyes fell on the hidden passage to the vault. It might be risky, but it was her only chance. She hurried to the concealed door and pushed it open, slipping inside just as more gunfire echoed above. The passage felt colder this time, its shadows deeper and more oppressive. Amira's breath came in short bursts as she reached the steel vault. She stared at the keypad, her mind whirring. The code. She needed the code. Her hands hovered over the buttons, but before she could attempt anything, she heard the basement door burst open. Heavy boots pounded against the floor. Amira pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest. The intruders were close. "Check the vault," a gruff voice barked. "It has to be here." Amira's stomach twisted. They were after the vault, just as she feared. She heard them rummaging through the basement, their voices growing louder as they approached the passage. Desperation surged within her. If they found her here, it would all be over. Her fingers flew over the keypad, entering the first combination that came to mind: Khalid's birth date. The keypad blinked red, denying her entry. She tried again, this time using the date of their wedding. Another denial. The footsteps were getting closer. Amira took a deep breath, her mind racing for another possibility. Then she remembered something Khalid had said. "Everything I've done for you." Could it be? She punched in her own birth date. The keypad beeped and the vault clicked open. Relief and terror flooded her simultaneously as she swung the door open. Inside, rows of files and electronic drives lined the shelves. She grabbed a handful of documents, scanning them quickly. Names, transactions, photographs, all incriminating evidence tied to powerful individuals. This was why Khalid had gone to such lengths to keep the vault hidden. But there was no time to dwell. The intruders were entering the passage. Amira stuffed the documents into her shirt and closed the vault, hoping they wouldn't notice it had been opened. She crouched behind a stack of boxes, her breath shallow as the men entered the room. "It's here somewhere," one of them growled. "Spread out." Amira clenched her fists, willing herself to stay calm. The men moved methodically, checking every corner of the room. One of them stopped near the vault, running his fingers along its edges. "It's locked," he said. "He hasn't opened it." "Then we'll make him open it," the other replied. "Let's go." The men retreated, their footsteps echoing down the passage. Amira waited until the sound faded completely before emerging from her hiding spot. Her body trembled as she clutched the stolen documents. She didn't know who these men were or how much they knew, but she understood one thing. This wasn't just about Khalid anymore. She was now a part of something far bigger and far more dangerous. She crept back to the basement, her heart pounding with every step. When she reached the main room, she locked the hidden door behind her and sank onto the bed, clutching the documents to her chest. Her mind raced with questions and fears, but one thought stood out above the rest. She couldn't trust anyone. Not Khalid, not Yara. The only way to survive was to uncover the truth, all of it, and decide her next move before it was too late. The first rays of dawn broke over the horizon as Amira sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the stolen documents. Her body was sore, her mind a tangled web of fear and determination. She had survived the night, but the danger was far from over. The contents of the vault were now in her possession, and she was certain they were the reason for the attack on the mansion. The faint creak of the basement door startled her. She scrambled to hide the documents beneath the mattress, just as Khalid stepped into the room. His face was haggard, dark circles under his eyes betraying a sleepless night. When his gaze met hers, there was something different in his expression, a mixture of relief and regret. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Amira hesitated before nodding. "I'm fine." "What happened?" Khaled sighed, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "They came from the vault," he admitted. "I managed to drive them off, but it was close. Too close." Amira's jaw tightened. "You need to tell me everything, Khaled. No more secrets." He looked at her for a long moment, then sat down heavily on the chair across from her. "You're right. You deserve the truth." Amira's breath caught. She had been waiting for this moment, but now that it was here, she wasn't sure if she was ready for what he might reveal. "The vault contains evidence," Khaled began. "Evidence of crimes committed by some of the most powerful people in the region. Corruption, fraud, even murder. I started collecting it years ago, thinking I could use it as leverage if I ever needed to protect myself, or you." Amira's heart sank. "Why didn't you destroy it?" Khaled's gaze hardened. "Because destroying it wouldn't make the danger go away. Those people don't just forget, and now they know I have it. That's why I've kept you hidden, why I've done everything I could to keep you safe. But it hasn't worked," she said quietly. "They still came. They know about the vault, don't they?" Khaled nodded, his shoulders sagging. "Yes, and now it's only a matter of time before they come again." Amira hesitated, then reached under the mattress and pulled out the documents. Khaled's eyes widened as she held them out to him. "I took these," she admitted. "Last night, when they came. I had to see for myself what was so important." Khaled took the documents, his hands trembling slightly. He flipped through them, his expression darkening with each page. "You shouldn't have done this," he said, his voice low. "If they find out you—" "They won't," Amira interrupted. "Not if we're smart. Khaled, this isn't just your burden to bear anymore. If we're going to survive this, we need to work together." He looked at her, his expression softening. "You're braver than I ever gave you credit for," he said. "But this is dangerous, Amira. More dangerous than you realize." "I realize it," she said firmly. "And I'm not running anymore. We need to do something, Khaled. We can't just wait for them to come back." Khaled nodded slowly, his resolve hardening. "You're right. We need to take control of the situation. But it won't be easy. These people, they don't play by the rules." "Neither do we," Amira replied, a spark of determination lighting in her eyes. For the first time in what felt like forever, Khaled smiled. It was faint and fleeting, but it was enough to remind Amira of the man she had fallen in love with. Together, they began to formulate a plan, poring over the documents and identifying the key players involved. By the time the sun was fully up, they had a strategy. It was risky and uncertain, but it was their best chance. Amira felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration as they prepared to set their plan into motion. For the first time, she felt like she was no longer a prisoner in this game. She was a player, and she was ready to fight for her future. The desert sun hung high in the sky as Amira and Khaled drove toward their destination. The tension in the Jeep was palpable, their plan running through both their minds. Amira clutched a file tightly in her lap, containing the most damning evidence from the vault. It was a dangerous gamble, but the only way to force the key players to back down was to show them that Khaled wasn't bluffing. The plan was simple in theory, but fraught with risk. Khaled had arranged a meeting with one of the key figures behind the attack on the mansion. They would offer a trade, silence in exchange for safety. If it worked, they might finally be free from the shadow of the vault. Amira glanced at Khaled as he gripped the steering wheel, his jaw setting grim determination. For all his faults, his willingness to risk everything for her filled her with a strange mixture of gratitude and guilt. She reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "Are you sure about this?" she asked quietly. Khaled nodded without hesitation. "It's the only way. If we show them we're not afraid to fight back, they'll think twice about coming after us again." The Jeep crested a dune, and their meeting spot came into view. A lone, weathered building in the middle of nowhere. Khaled parked the Jeep a short distance away, and they climbed out, the scorching sand crunching under their feet. As they approached the building, Amira's pulse quickened. The man waiting inside was a stark contrast to the desolation around them. Dressed impeccably in a dark suit, he exuded an air of power and control. His piercing gaze flicked between Khalid and Amira as they entered. "You've come prepared, I see," the man said, his voice smooth but laced with menace. Khalid didn't waste time. He placed the file on the table between them and opened it, revealing pages of incriminating documents. The man's expression didn't falter, but Amira noticed the faintest flicker of unease in his eyes. "You've gone to great lengths to protect these," the man remarked, leaning back in his chair. "But what makes you think I'll let you walk away after showing me this? Because if anything happens to us, copies of these documents will find their way to the authorities," Khalid said firmly. "We've ensured that every piece of evidence in that vault is accounted for and ready to be released if we don't make it back." The man's smile was thin and humorless. "You're playing a dangerous game, Khalid. So are you," Khalid shot back. "But I'm done playing. This ends here. Leave us alone, and you'll never hear from me again. Keep coming after us, and everything you've built will come crashing down." The room was silent for a long moment, the tension almost unbearable. Amira held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Finally, the man leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "Fine," he said. "You've made your point. But know this, if you cross me again, there won't be a second chance." Khalid nodded, his expression unyielding. "We won't." The man gestured toward the door. "Then I suggest you leave before I change my mind." Amira and Khalid wasted no time. They gathered the file and exited the building, the oppressive heat of the desert air feeling almost like a relief compared to the suffocating tension inside. They climbed back into the Jeep and drove away, neither of them speaking until the building was nothing but a speck on the horizon. "Do you think he'll keep his word?" Amira asked finally. Khalid's grip on the wheel tightened. "For now, but we can't let our guard down. Not yet." They drove in silence for a while, the weight of what they had just done settling over them. For the first time in weeks, Amira felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't over, not entirely, but they had taken the first step toward reclaiming their lives. As they approached the mansion, now eerily quiet after the chaos of the attack, Amira reached out and placed a hand on Khalid's arm again. "Thank you," she said softly. He glanced at her, his expression softening. "For what?" "For trusting me, for letting me be part of this." Khalid smiled faintly. "I couldn't have done it without you." Together, they stepped back into the house, their bond stronger than ever. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, they faced it as equals, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead. The mansion stood quiet against the vast desert landscape, its walls bearing the silent scars of the recent attack. Inside, however, there was a newfound sense of peace. Khalid and Amira moved through the house with purpose, cleaning the remnants of chaos and rebuilding their lives piece by piece. Weeks had passed since their tense meeting in the desert. The shadow of danger still lingered, but it felt less oppressive. Khalid's network of informants reported no further movements from the powerful figures they had confronted, and the documents from the vault remained securely hidden in multiple locations. For now, they were safe. Amira stood on the balcony overlooking the dunes, the cool evening breeze brushing against her skin. The setting sun painted the sands in shades of gold and crimson, a striking contrast to the turmoil she had endured. She felt stronger now, more in control of her fate than she had ever been. Khalid joined her, a glass of water in hand. He leaned against the railing, his expression contemplative. "Do you think it's really over?" he asked quietly. Amira glanced at him, her gaze steady. "Not completely, but we've taken back some control. That's a start." He nodded, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You've changed. You know, you're not the same woman I locked in that basement." Amira smirked, the memory of her captivity now a distant echo. "Good, because that woman didn't know how to fight back. Now she does." They stood in silence for a while, the weight of their shared experiences binding them in ways neither had anticipated. The horizon stretched endlessly before them, a reminder of both the isolation they had endured and the possibilities that lay ahead. "What now?" Amira asked. her voice softer. Khalid exhaled, his gaze distant. We rebuild. We find a way to move forward. Together. Amira nodded, a sense of calm washing over her. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time, she felt ready to face it. The secrets of the vault might never truly disappear, but she and Khalid had faced the storm and emerged stronger. As the last rays of sunlight dipped below the horizon, Amira reached for Khalid's hand. He intertwined his fingers with hers, their bond a testament to the trials they had overcome. Together, they turned away from the desert and stepped back into the house, ready to embrace whatever challenges the future held. The mansion stood as a fortress against the sands, no longer just a place of secrets and confinement, but a symbol of resilience and hope. For Amira and Khalid, it marked the beginning of a new chapter, one built on trust, unity, and the unyielding strength to face whatever lay ahead.